Welcome to Harvest Time Bible Institute of Oklahoma. My name is Lori Scroggins and I'll be a facilitator today. We're going to pick up where we left off last time. We're going to we're still in the book of Genesis, and we're going to start on chapter 12. Chapter 12 deals with the call of Abraham. Now, before I get started, I want to give you a little background about Abraham. Abraham was born 2,161 years BC. He was the ninth generation of Shem, which is the son of Noah. Abraham's name at first was Abram, which means high father or exalted father, and later it was changed to Abraham, which means the father of multitudes. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the Abraham covenant. And in chapter 12, verse 1, we see the Lord appearing to Abraham and telling Abraham to get out of his country, away from his kindred, away from his father's house, into a land that he was showing. And that's exactly what Abraham did. He gathered up his family and he moved to the land that the Lord led him to, which was the land of Canaan. And once he got there, the Lord told him that that land would be for him and his descendants forever. So that's one of the covenants that God made with Abraham. And I would like to read the covenant that God gave Abraham. And let's see, let's go down to verse, look like 6. Let's start in verse 7. And the Lord appeared unto Abram and said, Unto thy seed will I give this land. And there built he an altar unto the Lord who appeared unto him. Now, the reason why Abraham built an altar unto the Lord, this altar was a form of worship. That's the way he was worshiping God and praising God for the promise that he had told him about, and also giving him thanks for what he was going to do, because he believed it completely that God would actually do that for him. He believed it so completely, so he just started worshiping. He built the altar and started worshiping Abraham. And I don't want to go down too far, but I want to read the promises that he made unto him. Okay, the promise is found in verse 2. And I will make thee a great nation. I will bless thee and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. Verse 3. I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee. And in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed. So those are just a few of the promises that God made Abraham. And then as we read along and go into the different chapters, you'll see how the Lord started fulfilling those promises that he had made to Abraham. So while Abraham was traveling, there was a famine that came in the land where he was, and he had to leave Canaan and go to Egypt. On his way to Egypt, he takes his wife and talked to her and said, you are a beautiful woman, and if I tell them that I'm your husband, they will kill me and take you. So let's just tell them the part about you're just my sister. Because she was his half-sister. But he just wanted to just tell them that part, not tell them the whole story. And so when they arrived into Egypt, sure enough, Abraham, Sarah was taken directly to the Pharaoh. They knew, but she was such a beautiful woman. And she was at the age of 65 at this time. And even at the age of 65, she was so beautiful that they knew that the king would want to see her. So they took Abraham, and as a result, and we done skipped all the way down to we're still in chapter 12, but we're in verse 10 through 16. Back in those days, what they would do, they would give a dowry to somebody once they take. So he took him, thinking that that was his sister, thinking Sarah was Abram's sister. He took her and gave dowry to Abraham. So he gave him sheep, he gave him oxen, gave him just camels and everything like that in exchange for Sarah. But because, one of the promises the Lord had made is that I would bless them that bless thee, and I would curse them that curse thee. Taking his wife was not a thing of God. That was his wife. So the Lord interceded by placing a plague on the house of Pharaoh. And before Pharaoh came in unto Sarah, or Sarai at that time, he saw a plague in the house. I wish I knew what the plagues were, but it doesn't specify what plagues were, but his house was plagued. And so the Pharaoh comes to Abram and says, what is this thing that you have done to me? All these plagues that the Lord has put on me because of this thing that you've done. He said, why didn't you tell me she was your wife?
Mm-hmm.
So he gives Sarah back to Abraham and told him he can keep all the stuff that he originally gave. It wasn't like, okay, give me my stuff back. No, he didn't do that. He said, you can keep it all. Just go. Just get your wife and go, So that pretty much concludes the chapter 12. And now I would like to go to chapter 13. In chapter 13, they returned to Canaan. And at this time, Abram and his nephew Lot, who came with him and had departed and was with him, had their substance, their cattle, their sheep, and all the herds that they had gotten so big. Lot's herds had grown big, and so had Abraham's. So now the land can't support both of the families. It can't support it. It's too many animals for them to graze off the land. So what Abraham approached Lot and said, the land cannot support us. So why don't you go your way and I'll go the opposite way. That way we'll be plenty of food for all of our animals, and there won't be no strife between us. So Lot looked up and he seen the land, and he chose the land by the Jordan, which was Sodom, near Gomorrah. So he said that he would take that. So Abraham agreed, and he went another way. So they departed and went their separate ways. Only thing, Lot didn't know that the men in Sodom were wicked men. He had no way of knowing. He was just choosing it based on the land, of seeing what land would be best for his animals. So, but God spoke to Abram and told him to look to the north, to the south, to the east, and the west. And everything that your eyes behold, that is the land that I'm going to give to you and your descendants. And it was an everlasting covenant. And even today, that land is still set aside for Abraham and his descendants. Now, you may ask, what land is that? That's the land of Israel. Israel was the promised land for the people of Abraham's people. And God still wants that land for them today, And it says, bless, the curse, not curse, but the promise of the covenant is still in place today. If you bless Israel, the Lord will bless you. So we got to keep that in mind. Need to keep that in mind. Okay, later down, so that's pretty much the end of chapter 13. Then we're going to proceed to chapter 14. And chapter 14 is talking about the battles of the king. Back in those days, when you was a powerful king with a powerful kingdom, other kingdoms around paid tribute to them, so they would stay in your good graces. So you wouldn't attack them or come after them. They would have to pay tribute to you, and as long as they paid the tribute to you, you were fine. And that's what they did to this king. They paid tribute to him, and they did that for 12 years. Well, on the 13th year, they didn't want to pay tribute to him anymore, so they stopped paying it. And on the 14th year, he grabbed his allies and started to attack them. Now, if you see in verse 1, you will see the players. Verse 1 tells you the king, the mighty king that everyone was paying tribute to, and that's Chedor Omar, king of Elam, and his allies was Tidal and Archak, king of Elasar. So these were his allies. Oh, and Ampherdale, the king of Sinar. Those were his allies, and they were in war against the other kings who wouldn't pay tribute to them any longer. Those was the king of Gomorrah and king of Salem, and the king of Belial and king of Zor. They refused to pay. And if the story probably would not have even been mentioned in the Bible if it had not been for the fact that when if you scroll down to verse 11, you would see that when they attacked, they took everything. They took all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their victuals and went their way. So what they're saying there is that when they attacked them, they took all their stuff, took all their food, and they took their people. They took the women, the children, they took some of the men. And one of the men that they took was Lot. That's Abraham's nephew. So once Abraham learned the fact that Lot had been captured, he organized his household. Now keep in mind, this was 5 kings with their armies, but Lot, with his household of 318, went up in battle against those kings and against their armies. And I'm not sure, but even if I don't know how many men that was, the Bible doesn't tell us that, but I'm sure they outnumbered Abram's family, outnumbered Abram's 318 men, since it was 5 or 4 different countries, So I'm sure they outnumbered them, but Abram won the battle. Why? Because God was with him. And that was part of the blessing that he had mentioned earlier in chapter 12. I will bless them that bless you, and I will curse them that curse you. So when he messed with his family, they were in trouble now, not just because of Abraham, but because God was with Abraham. Mm-hmm. So they won the war. Abraham won the war, and he comes back home. He returns Lot, and he brings back all the people that was taken into captivity, and brings back all their stuff. It was a very, and so he said, I will bless thee, and I will make thee a blessing. Abraham, see the promise being fulfilled. Mm-hmm. He's making him a blessing as well. Mm-hmm. Okay, so when he comes back, the first thing he does, he meets with Melchizedek. Melchizedek is, there's not much they talk about him here, but Melchizedek was a prototype, a type of a Christ. Not that he saved the world or anything, but he was both king and priest, just like Jesus is. Jesus was both king and priest, but he was also king, priest, and savior. But Melchizedek was kind of a prototype, or kind of a foreshadow of the Christ, So when he came back, he paid his tithes. And you say, what is tithes? Tithes is 10% of your income, that's what we do it today. Back then, it's 10% of whatever they had. If they had 100 sheep, well, they would give you 10 of them, And today, we don't have sheep or stuff like that. At least most of us don't. But what we do, we pay our tithes in the money that we get. Once we get money, we get $100, give 10 of it back to the church that you attend, or to the ministry that you want to sponsor. Okay. And so he paid tithes to Melchizedek, and then he takes the other things, the rest of the stuff, and he returns them to Solomon. Now the king of Solomon told him, just give me back the people, and you could just keep all the rest of the stuff. In other words, you could keep the spoils. You won the battle. The winner of the battle got to keep the spoils. But Abraham said, no, I will not keep the spoils. I won't keep anything unless you say that you